Welcome, everybody. It's so great to see you this evening. We're glad that you've joined us as we kick off the holiday season. We are in December now, so it's time to get our festive on and get things rolling in the holiday spirit. And so we're going to start that with Vera Felts giving us a presentation about gingerbread. Any of you that know Vera know that she is the Gingerbread Lady, not only on stamps, but in real life too. She was just telling us about her gingerbread that she's been making. So I will let her tell you some more about that. But we welcome you and we'll turn it over to you, Vera.
Well, I titled my presentation Sugar and Spice on Stamps, but oh, there we go. Can you
Yep.
see sugar and spice on stamps now?
Yes.
All right, then maybe we're there. Um, and it just sounded a little more interesting than gingerbread on stamps. I've given this presentation to a couple or three individual stamp clubs around the country in the last couple or 3 years, um, as if I don't have anything to do anymore. For those of you who don't know me, I was the Jennifer of ATA. I was the executive director of ATA for 10 and a half years from 20 uh, 2009 till 2019 when Jennifer took over. So I know how busy she is all day, every day, and I've been less busy since I retired, but you'd be surprised how retirement years can be filled up just by saying yes to things like this, right? So, anyway, this talk is about gingerbread. And I thought I would talk first about the history of gingerbread and then about the different ingredients that we use in it now. Then show you some different stamps and then end with some covers. Um, I've been collecting gingerbread stamps for, well, at least 25 years. Possibly as many as 30. That's about the time well, I've been ATA member longer than that, but about the time I started making gingerbread for my own purpose and for a church project when I lived in Illinois. So, starting with the history of gingerbread, it probably starts with the Crusaders way back in the Middle Ages, who were one of the main influences for spreading not only religion and nationalities and so forth, but also culture and therefore foods around much of Western Europe, Asia, and perhaps beyond. These particular stamps go right in with gingerbread and also with in most medieval history or any kind of history collectors that we might have among us. So that starts around the Middle Ages, and for a long time, really Germany was the center of where gingerbread began. And it pretty much stayed in the area of Germany and Western Europe. But then, when the Crusaders went far and wide, it really spread to the east. And we've all heard of the Silk Road, or sometimes it was called the Spice Route, that went all the way to China and the waters all the way at the end of China. So this brings in our map study unit, if any of you are map collectors or members of that unit. And this made gingerbread more possible because the spices that are used in it are primarily from those faraway places. So it needed the silk route or the spice silk road or the spice route active for a few centuries before the recipes could really develop for gingerbread. Here's a couple other map pick photos that one is the stamp, one is a souvenir sheet that shows the Silk Road. And then as the after the spices were brought to Western Europe, as I said, primarily Germany, um, the town of Nuremberg was really the center. Now, we historians, or those of you who know your history about World War II, know that Nuremberg is famous for much more than just gingerbread. But it was a medieval town, and it was really the center of a lot of trade, not just trade for spices, but much of the goods that came over the Silk Road ended up in Nuremberg. One of the places that what we now know as gingerbread was really often made were in the abbeys, the religious abbeys that were started by the Catholic Church. The stamp from Saar at the top right shows the Metlock Abbey in Saar, but I could have used almost any abbey stamp and it would have served just as well here, because just as today, the monks who lived in the abbeys needed to have a trade to make some kind of money to keep their abbey repaired and as a going concern. So the often the gingerbread was a way for the abbey to make money. I threw in a stamp of a modern German baker there at bottom right, but it also shows on the left side an early oven that might have been from medieval times where gingerbread was made, along with a modern mixer like it's used now commercially. So the history of gingerbread develops a little bit, but it is primarily cakes, something like we would call cornbread. Our cornbread now would be very much like the gingerbread cake back in those times, except just with the addition of molasses or some kind of sweetener and some spices. The first gingerbread figures that we know of, the gingerbread boys and girls, are often attributed to Queen Victoria, but nay, it happened to be Queen Elizabeth I of Great Britain who started that very famous way of making gingerbread. And Queen Elizabeth I was ahead of her time. She decided she wanted to give Christmas gifts to each of the people in her court shaped like themselves. So she is actually the one who gets the attribution to making the first gingerbread men and women. And they were of the court of Queen Elizabeth I. Then that was kind of carried down through Great Britain until Queen Victoria came into vogue in her long rule of Great Britain. And of course, we all know that Queen Victoria is on the first stamp, as stamps are known. We now call the penny black of Great Britain the first stamp. And this Queen Victoria stamp is often called the second stamp, the Victoria red stamp. And fast forward till our history around now. Many of us, this particular book is probably about the vintage of some of our children or grandchildren, but all through the ages, I have a very early copy of a gingerbread book also that's probably about my grandmother's age. So through much of American history anyway, there has been the story of the gingerbread man in many different kinds of books along the way. Now for the ingredients in gingerbread. One of them is sugar, and I just couldn't pass up the opportunity to show you one of my favorite stamps in the whole world, which is the one on the left. This is a 1961 stamp from Czechoslovakia showing a sugar beet and then a hot drink, steaming hot drink with sugar cubes as it might have been served. The reason I like this stamp so much is that it's a pictorial, but it is also engraved. And it is just so lovely to see a pictorial engraved stamp, I mean, of a subject matter that we people in ATA can envision, etc., rather than the kind of sticker type stamps that we all know of, the lithographed, etc., that we have today. But the other two stamps do show sugar cane, both. Now, the one on the left is sugar beets. The two on the right here are sugar cane, cane fields that are grown in more the tropical areas of our country. Another main ingredient in gingerbread is molasses, and all sugar is simply refined molasses. They have taken a lot of the flavoring out to get molasses all the way to white sugar. But you will see that you would be able to find, if you were to collect this topic, quite a few stamps on molasses, or you could get a checklist from ATA or a list that would show you all the molasses of various kinds on stamps. And the train stamp from Guyana, 1987, is actually a molasses train that was used to bring the molasses out from the interior of the country out to be loaded on boats. Still, in many countries, molasses is cooked in kind of the same way it was when I was a child, when I watched sugarcane being boiled down to molasses on my great uncle's farm in Western Illinois. But you see here from Colombia the open pans. It cannot be a very sanitary way of making molasses, but the open pans where they're boiling and boiling and boiling it down to actually make molasses. One of the main spices, no guess here. We know ginger is one of the main spices in molasses. And ginger was named by the gentleman whom we know as Linnaeus, Carl van Linné, from his native language of Sweden was his name, but he's known to most of the world by the Latinized version Linnaeus. So we expect to find Linnaeus on Swedish stamps since he was born in Switzerland, and there have been several. I think the one that we would not know about is his home, is Hammarby, which was his estate in Sweden, and that was a stamp issued in 1963. Most of us know what ginger looks like. It's a root that grows under the ground. The bottom right stamp from Tanzania shows you just like it looks in our grocery stores. Um, and it is I should have really said a tuber rather than a root, but most of that, the part that we know about is a tuber that grows below the ground. And you see other pictures of the ginger blooming on the left stamp and the ginger growing up as a grass on the one from St. Vincent. So there are many, many stamps of ginger all around the world. You could just have a collection of ginger on stamps if you wish, but I find gingerbread to be much more interesting. Another spice in almost every gingerbread I know of is cinnamon. And I happen to all pick all stamps that have what we call cinnamon stick or stick cinnamon pictured on them. But cinnamon is actually the bark of a tree, and it's curled off of the outside of the bark as it's harvested. And as we all know, it's very, very pungent, but we mostly know it in its ground form. But this time of year, we can also buy cinnamon sticks in almost every store we know of, including, I suppose, Walmart. I'm having trouble with my cursor here. Here we go. Another common spice in gingerbread is nutmeg. And here you're going to learn just a little, maybe more than you ever wanted to know about spices. But nutmeg is the only plant that actually grows two different spices in the very same plant. So if you look at the bottom right stamp, the brown nut looks like what we can buy in our markets as a whole nutmeg that gets ground to make our spice. But then the next picture over, is kind of like a light brown or reddish husk all around that dark nut. That is the spice called mace, M-A-C-E. So there aren't very many gingerbread recipes that I've seen that call for mace, although some do. It's a very mild spice compared with the other spices that we've been naming so far. So if it were in gingerbread, and sometimes it is, I think it kind of gets overpowered. The mace gets overpowered. But these other stamps pretty much just show the nutmeg. They don't show you. Well, the one on the left from Sri Lanka actually does show the reddish, lacy looking coating coming off of the nutmeg nut. That will be ground into mace, and it'll be much more valuable probably than the mace will. I mean, the mace will be much more valuable than the nutmeg will. And now we come to the other pungent spice that we often find in our gingerbread of today, and that is cloves. Most of us maybe associate the whole cloves that we're seeing in these on these stamps with Easter, because it's often used to flavor ham, either by putting the whole cloves all around a ham or using it in a sauce of some kind like that. But there almost always are ground cloves in nutmeg also. So those are the main spices and flavorings that one would find in gingerbread. Now we'll move to some stamps with gingerbread on them. And how naive I was when I started collecting gingerbread, I thought, oh, there might even be 10 or 12 stamps. Well, that was 25 years ago, but there are probably 110 or 12 stamps now if we really count up our gingerbread stamps. First, the ones from the US. Very early in our Christmas stamps, we found this needlepoint Christmas tree, 1973, and front and center in the Christmas tree was a gingerbread boy. And later, a few years, we had what was called the gingerbread Santa, kind of a made-up character, I do believe, but it made a nice little stamp. Then we skipped a long way before we found very much more gingerbread. It was until 2005 when this holiday cookies series came out. And Um, I prefer to think that this little guy at the top right stamp, the right little boy, is a gingerbread. Now, there have been people who try to tell me he was chocolate, and we don't see too many brownies or chocolate stamps or chocolate cookies around Christmas time. So for the purpose of my collection, as we know, as topicalists, we get to name what is in our collection, and we can have our own reasons for omitting or including a stamp. And I'm just claiming that little boy as a gingerbread boy. Another one came just a few years later with these holiday symbols, 4 years later in 2009. And this issue of stamps was available both in the regular size, the one on the left, and then the smaller size as it's used in the ATM stamps, the ones that are printed like a dollar bill, and it's the size that goes through a dollar bill in bank teller machines. Then 4 years after that, we have the gingerbread houses, which I haven't mentioned much about. My Personally, I make hundreds of gingerbread people each year. And I did make a gingerbread house in my children's preschool class out of graham crackers, but I'm not the lady you want to talk to if you want to find out how to make gingerbread houses. But again, I've certainly decided to add gingerbread houses to my gingerbread collection. So there's a nice assortment of gingerbread house items from this issue in my collection. There's a few odds and ends of other gingerbread stamps that can be found in the US. The CVP, Scott calls it CVP, computer vended postage. Um, there was that notable one in 2017 that you probably have seen, you collectors. It's in the upper left corner of this slide, and I believe it was ginger cookie dough that was used to make all different kinds of cutout cookies. So again, I'm calling it gingerbread. And then a couple years later, there was much harder to find one that actually computer vended postage. It was in the 46 cent, 46 cent time frame. And no, I take that back. I'm sorry, the gingerbread house on the upper left would have been before the forever stamp that I'm showing on the upper left here. So I should have had those two reversed. And then, of course, there are also CVP stamps listed for the companies like Zazzle.com and Scott. Um, Stamps.com. Those are both kind of listed in the Scott catalog, but these were the ones where you could submit a photograph into a private company, like a photograph of a baby, and then have the baby's picture on that computer vended postage when you send out the baby announcements. Guess what? This is my gingerbread baby from back in that time frame, 42 cent time frame. That's one of my many thousands of gingerbreads that I baked for my church when I lived in Illinois. And I just took photo of it and submitted it to Zazzle, and that's how that stamp came about. So I don't think anybody has any of those except my relatives and anybody I sent a card to. But if any of you get into collecting gingerbread, I would be happy to send you one. All you have to do is let me know you're collecting gingerbread. So I decided to put this in with stamps because it's not really stamps, but it's stamp cancellations from the US. I don't know if anybody here is from Kentucky, but I sure hope so because Knott County, Kentucky, has in Hinman, Kentucky, has had a gingerbread festival for many, many years, and it's a pretty big deal. Um, this cutout little cute thingy at the top here is right off of their website. So for quite a few years, from the late 90s well into the 2000s, they did a different postmark every year. Well, because I didn't know they were doing that, and because I was too busy with ATA to get around to sending in for the postmark on time. Recognize that idea, Ginger or Jennifer? Um, I have only a few of their postmarks, but I know that there's about 20 of these available. So if you ever see any of those in a 50 cent or a dollar box, you know who would love to receive one. Thank you very much. Okay, now we're moving on to international stamps. And I have, as I mentioned, there are well over 100 international stamps now that I know of that have gingerbread on them. However, I have kind of broadened my categories. I no longer just collect people and houses, but now Canada comes out with these beautiful stars or something that looks like a Christmas tree ornament. It's all gingerbread, don't you think? I do. Anyway, in 2012, Canada put out this neat little series. These were really tiny, about the size of a US penny, I think. They were really, really tiny stamps, but I enjoyed them nonetheless. And they've redeemed themselves a little last year in my eyes because they put out more gingerbread stamps in Canada for this time they moved on to gingerbread houses. But many, many countries have put out stamps, not all just the northern countries where it is usually made, but some of the tropical countries too. So this, I just picked out a few. The Austria stamp, just like that needlepoint Christmas tree we had in the US, this has a gingerbread tree on it, or a gingerbread person. You might have to get out your magnifying glass or look extra close, but it's there on their Christmas tree. The one from Cayman Islands at the top is one of my very favorite from other countries. It's like sea stars, um, and they've made them into gingerbread people, so to speak. And none of that is mentioned in the Scott catalog. It's just all that it has to do with Christmas carols. But these little creatures were dancing to the Christmas carols, I guess. You get some pretty fanciful kinds of things, especially from other countries that aren't really familiar with gingerbread. In Gibraltar in 2017, now this is stretching a little bit farther. This is not exactly gingerbread, this is a cupcake, but they put a gingerbread monkey or macaque on top of the cupcake. So if Christina Esbeck is here, I'm sure Christina has this in her cupcake collection. These are the monkeys that are so well known for pestering the tourists as they go up the Rock of Gibraltar. So when Gibraltar did their series of cupcakes, they did a monkey. Well, it looked enough like gingerbread to me that I kind of sort of call it gingerbread. Here's a more traditional stamp from Serbia. You see both kind of a house and a gingerbread person there, but traditional decorations. And Estonia, just a beautiful stamp nothing but just white frosting, piping, a gingerbread star. Now, s- I'm prepared for the question of how many stamps each year come out showing gingerbread. That's for those of you who have wheels turning in your head, thinking maybe I'd like that as a topic, but it's probably too expensive. Well, here's your answer. For 2025, we have five. And I think that's probably about average for what different countries are putting out now, somewhere around 5 or 6 stamps a year. We have two from Finland this year in the upper left corner here. We have a choir and a parade. I think the choir is the one on the left and the parade is the one on the right. Then we have two from Sweden. Those come from a set of 10. Um, Half a dozen or so have to do with food for you gastronomists out there. But I believe the only two that have to do with gingerbread are these two. So we have a gentleman piping frosting on a gingerbread house, and we have a little girl rolling out cookie dough with gingerbread cookie dough with all her might. And that cookie at the top center that she's already probably cut out and put on her pan is a pepparkakor. That's Swedish for gingerbread. And their gingerbread people in Sweden are much more the shape of this cookie that we see here at the top of that Swedish stamp, the center bottom stamp. They are not, they do have arms and feet, but it's much more a squarish or rectangular shape than we have for most of our gingerbread figures. But pepper is spicy. Black pepper is often included actually in gingerbread recipes. And kakor is like cookie. So pepper kakor, spicy cookie. You can see how that kind of works in with the gingerbread theme. And then my favorite actually of this year's, whoops, sorry, of this year's cookies is this creche piping from Slovenia. Am I right, Slovenia? Those of you who know the Slovakian countries, I think this is Slovenia. Anyway, all of the design on this, the red frosting has been put on the cookie, and then the white is all frosting that has been piped on or flowed on. And see the depth that you can really even see the depth in that little bitty stamp. You can see the depth that they have with the creche, for instance. So that's kind of my favorite one. One other place I might mention to look for this would be true both for US and for international, but one other place to look for gingerbread cookies is on Christmas seals or charity stamps. And so here's a couple from the Åland Islands, which is an offshoot of Finland. Uh, um, One from Sweden at the bottom left. There you see the TB on the right, bottom right of that. You see the symbol for tuberculosis charity. So that is a Christmas seal or a charity stamp from Sweden for 1985, it looks like. And then the one on the bottom right is a souvenir sheet from Denmark from Christmas seals. So these were originally put out as a sheet of 50 in 1956, but ever aware of the opportunity to make some money from stamp collectors, shall I say, but for a good cause at least. In this case, they reproduced 10 of those 50 stamps from 1956 on a souvenir sheet in 2000. And ever since, they have been putting out souvenir sheets as well as large sheets of 30 or 50. That's the way the stamp trade goes, but we all have fun with it anyway. All right, last section here is about covers of various kinds on stamps. And most of these are US. That I just pulled out some of my very favorite ones. This one is done by Dave Bennett from LA area who used to work for Disney before he retired. His cachet business is called Cachet Tunes and very cartoonish, as you say, as you would expect from Dave Bennett. You can see all kinds of Santa's elves doing making various kinds of gingerbread cookies, and of course, tasting them along the way. And Fred Collins is another cachet maker who often does an overall type of design for his cachets. And he did this one for the holiday cookies, but these really look like little Scandinavian elves to me. Then for the winter holidays one in 2009, he did these gingerbread people and gingerbread puppy on his cachet for that issue for the gingerbread stamp of the four. And this little one I dearly love. I don't know how many of you know Chris Lazaroff from South Carolina. Chris's wife, Denise, is also a cachet maker, and she's kind of combined scrapbooking, what I would call the hobby of scrapbooking, with cachet making. And so this line of her cachets, she called 3D Laz, and Laz for Lazaroff, I suppose. And then she also put on the smaller of the gingerbread stamps. Remember, I showed you there was a regular size one, and then the smaller, the ATM size. So she did put out a larger cover, a regular size 6 3/4 cover, and then she made this teeny one to go with the smaller one of those stamps. And it is very tiny. It looks tiny here on the page, and I left it that way to call attention to how small it really is. Shades of blue are among my favorite colors, and I guess that's why I like this Mary Kay Fisher cachet. I believe Mary Kay she's from Indiana. I believe she's still making cachets now, and she's often, I believe, at the cachet makers bourse at Gas. And she made this one looking like a winter night for the 2005 holiday cookies issue. Doris Gold just passed away, I believe, maybe last year. She was a really outstanding cachet maker and she painted such lovely designs. Well, in 2005 and in that time frame, she did a whole series of cachets of stamps around the world. I mean, kitchens around the world. She was using American stamps, but she was showing kitchens around the world. So this was her drawing and painting of a kitchen in Finland. And you see the big dough. That looks like a cabbage chopper that my grandmother used to have, that big dough bowl there in the center of the room where she was making her cookies and where I'm sure the family made bread and all too. But I wish I had a lot more of that series, but this is a favorite of mine. And my last cover that I like is Bob Emmerich of Emmerich Cachets made this one for me when I was working for ATA, and it's done in oils. I think it's my only cachet that I have done that I have that is colored in oil painting. So, thank you for sharing this with me. Um, I'd be happy to share other information with you. On the bottom left, I put the cover in tiny, I know it's tiny, but I put the cover of the American Philatelist from December of 2006. And they used my article that I wrote that year on philatelic gingerbread. They used it as their cover article for their, again, December of 2006. So if any of you have access to copies from way back, take a look at that if you'd like to more about know more about gingerbread, or if you can't locate a copy, you know who to write because I think I have a few extra still. So I'm signing off with this program with my favorite gingerbread stamp in the bottom right. It's a Finland stamp from 2002, and I just fancy that might have been me as a little girl in my 4-H project making some gingerbread heart cookies, and that just kind of looks like I wish I looked back then. Okay, so thank you for having me, and if there's time, I'd be glad to take questions.
Thank you so much, Vera. That was so fun and so interesting. Since most people weren't here when we got started, tell everybody how many cookies you've made so far this year.
I'm baking gingerbread cookies for the Seattle Children's Hospital, and I've made 400. They're 4 inches tall, and they're decorated with piping, frosting piping, and lots of candy. But I haven't decorated a one because I've had 21 different neighbors from my neighborhood all around where I live now in Sequim, Washington. And my friends, my neighbors here come in either one or two people at a time, and they are helping me. They put all the candy on. I have like 85 or 90 kinds of candy, and all my neighbors put the candy on and decorate them. And we sold 340 10 days, or no, last Saturday, and 10 days from now, I need to bake some more before then. So when I get off of here, I'm going to be rolling out dough tonight.
Wow. Well, I'm so glad you have some elves to help you with your baking project. Well, thank you so much for coming, everybody. I hope you enjoyed it. It was wonderful, Vera. Thank you so much. I'm feeling very festive now, so I need to
Well,
go.
it's time we all need to start on Christmas. So
Yes, it is.
maybe
Yes, it
this will
is.
help.